He walked into court a broken veteran, trembling hands, and a claim everyone had already decided to dismiss. The judge smirked. The gallery scoffed. His sister wept in silence, powerless to make them see the war still raging inside him. But then, the doors opened and a decorated four-star general walked in. What followed silenced the courtroom, cornered the judge, and turned a sterile hearing into a moment of truth, honor, and sacrifice. You won't believe how one soldier's story forced justice to finally listen. The county courthouse had all the warmth of a morgue. Whitewashed walls, chipped linoleum tiles, and fluorescent lights that buzzed with the faint irregularity of dying insects. Each hum felt like a hammer in Daniel Reyes' skull. The room smelled faintly of coffee gone stale, of paper, of something clinical and impersonal. He sat at the plaintiff's table, spine stiff but hands betraying him. His fingers trembled. Not from cold, not from fear of truth, but from the weight of being forced to prove it. Daniel wore his only suit, the one his sister had helped him pick up from a discount rack 2 towns over. It didn't quite fit sleeves, a fraction too long, shoulders that pinched when he sat upright, but it was clean. His shoes, though scuffed, had been polished until he could see the faint blur of his reflection. He had tried, at least, to appear as the world wanted him to appear, composed, respectable, credible. Yet, as he stared at the stack of papers in front of him, medical reports, discharge summaries, appeals denied, his chest tightened with the crushing irony of it. He had bled for his country, carried bodies under fire, saved lives with nothing but gauze and grit, and here he was, reduced to paperwork and trembling hands. Across the room, Judge Morton leaned back in his leather chair, a man who looked as if he had never been tested by anything heavier than a late brief. His robe draped over him like a costume. He'd long since grown tired of wearing the fabric gathering in lazy folds around his midsection. His lips curled into something halfway between a smirk and a sneer as he tapped his pen against the bench, each click echoing like a gavel strike. He hadn't said much yet, but his eyes had said this was a waste of time. The gallery was half filled, a few reporters with notebooks resting against their knees, curious locals who had wandered in after seeing the notice posted on the courthouse door, and 2 older men, with veterans' caps sitting stiffly near the back, their faces unreadable. To them, this wasn't just a case. It was familiar. They had walked this same weary path of skepticism and bureaucracy. They had learned the hard way that the battlefield didn't end when you came home. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry as sandpaper. He glanced at the pitcher of water on the table, but the idea of pouring a glass, of lifting it without spilling, filled him with dread. His body betrayed him more in silence than in noise. His right leg bounced under the table, a habit he couldn't stop. His knuckles whitened as he clutched a pen too tightly. He was a soldier who had steadied his hands to stitch wounds under fire. Yet, here they shook before the indifference of a court clerk. At the defense table sat a state attorney, hair perfectly combed, suit pressed to military perfection, though the man had never known the weight of body armor. He leafed casually through his file, clearly confident in the outcome. The Department of Veterans Affairs had won cases like this countless times before. They had policies, precedents, loopholes. They had patience. Men like Daniel didn't. The bailiff called the room to order, with a voice that carried authority. Daniel recognized the clipped cadence of someone used to being obeyed. Everyone rose, chairs scraping the floor in an awkward chorus. Judge Morton entered fully now, robes swaying, and settled into his throne-like chair. He surveyed the room as though he were the sole arbiter of truth, the kind of man who measured worth not in sacrifice but in statistics. Daniel stood because he had to, but he felt the air close in around him. He thought of nights in Fallujah, where sand choked his lungs and mortar screamed across the horizon. He thought of men he'd carried, their blood soaking into his fatigues until it felt like his own. Those memories arrived uninvited, like shadows stretching long across a room that should have been bright. He blinked, tried to force them down, to focus on the here and now, but the buzzing lights, the sterile air, the heavy eyes on him, all of it blurred into one truth. He was back on trial, not for crimes committed, but for pain carried. When he sat again, the tremor in his hands returned. He pressed his palms flat against the table, as if he could steady himself by pinning his body to the wood. Across the bench, Judge Morton noticed and allowed himself a slight, almost imperceptible chuckle, not loud enough to draw rebuke, but sharp enough for Daniel to hear. It was the kind of laugh that said more than words ever could. You don't belong here. You're weak. This case is over before it begins. Daniel looked down at his notes. The Carefully written reminders, scrawled in Claire's neat handwriting. Breathe. Tell the truth. You've already survived worse. He exhaled, slow and shaky. But the sound of the judge's laugh lingered like shrapnel lodged too deep to remove. The hearing had barely begun. Yet already the battlefield felt stacked against him. And in that sterile county courtroom, with fluorescent lights buzzing like distant artillery, Daniel Reyes braced himself for another fight he never should have had to wage. Daniel Reyes had the look of a man built for endurance, not spectacle. His frame was lean, his skin tanned from too many Georgia afternoons spent fixing his sister's fence or hauling lumber for odd jobs that barely paid the bills. His hair was clipped short, still carrying the ghost of military regulation, though streaks of gray betrayed years that had aged him faster than the calendar. At 32, he had the eyes of someone twice his age, tired, cautious, always scanning the room before he let himself sit, before the uniform, before the medals. He had been just another boy from a working-class family in rural Alabama. Oldest of three, Daniel had grown up with the burden of responsibility pressed into him early. His father left when he was 12, and his mother, sweet but fragile, leaned on him more than she should have. He learned to be steady for everyone else, even when the ground beneath him shook. That steadiness made him a good medic, though at the time he hadn't joined for that reason. He enlisted at 19, chasing structure, chasing a paycheck, chasing the idea that service might mean something more than survival. The army gave him exactly that structure. Yes, but also chaos. They trained him to heal men on the edge of death, to run toward the sound of gunfire with nothing more than a field kit strapped to his back. He wore the Red Cross on his arm like a promise, a symbol that no matter how bad it got, someone would be there to pull you back. In Fallujah, that promise nearly killed him. It had been 2008. His platoon was caught in an ambush, an explosion flipping a Humvee into a ditch. The world erupted into fire and dust, bullets cracking through the smoke. Daniel didn't think. He didn't pause. He ran. He dragged men twice his size, blood slick across his hands, lungs burning with smoke. He remembered the screams, the chaos, the sharp taste of iron in the back of his throat. By the time it was over, 12 men had survived, who otherwise wouldn't have. Daniel had carried some, patched others, whispered lies of reassurance that they would live even when he wasn't sure himself. For that day, they pinned a bronze star on his chest, a ribbon, shiny and official, handed over with a handshake from a commander who barely knew his name. Daniel didn't wear it now. He didn't even take it out of the drawer where it lay, forgotten under old letters. Because medals didn't keep nightmares away. Medals didn't stop him from waking in the middle of the night, sweat soaking his shirt, heart pounding as if he were back in that ditch. Back under fire, back holding a boy whose last words had been, "Tell my mom I'm sorry." When he came home, the war didn't let him go. Crowded rooms made him flinch. Fireworks made him crawl out of bed and press himself against the wall until the echoes died. He couldn't sit with his back to a door, couldn't stomach the sharp pop of tires over potholes without jerking as if the earth itself had detonated. He wanted to explain, but how do you explain a war that followed you into every quiet moment? How do you make people understand that your silence wasn't indifference? It was survival. The Department of Veterans Affairs didn't understand. To them, he was just another file, another number. They asked him to fill out forms, to describe his nightmares in neat little boxes, to sit across from doctors who glanced at their watches as he tried to find words for things words weren't made to hold. Twice they denied him. Insufficient evidence, condition not disconnected. A third time, they wrote that his symptoms did not impair his ability to function in society. Daniel laughed bitterly when he read that function. Was it functioning to avoid grocery stores because the crowds made his chest tighten? Was it functioning to sleep in shifts, 2 hours here, an hour there, because rest meant dreams and dreams meant terror? The system didn't see him. Not the medic who had bled in the sand, not the soldier who had saved men under fire, not the man who woke every day to fight a battle with no front lines. To them, he was exaggerating. To them, he was a drain. And yet, Daniel had come here, to this courtroom, not to ask for pity, but for dignity. Benefits weren't charity. They were a promise. A promise the nation had made to him, and to every man and woman who wore the uniform. He wasn't asking for it. Riches, he was asking for the chance to live, without wondering if he could pay for therapy. Without wondering if the roof over his sister's head would hold another month. As he sat at the plaintiff's table, hands trembling, Daniel wasn't just a veteran in a suit too big for him. He was a man carrying every battle he'd ever fought, visible and invisible, into a room that already doubted him. And as Judge Morton leaned back, smirking like the outcome had already been written, Daniel swallowed the familiar truth. Sometimes the hardest war wasn't the one fought overseas. It was the one you fought to be believed. The courthouse clock ticked with a cruel indifference, each second cutting across Daniel's resolve like a razor's edge. For the world beyond those walls, it was just another Wednesday morning. Traffic buzzed through downtown. A mother herded her children across the street toward school. A delivery truck idled outside the bakery. Life pressed forward, ordinary and uninterrupted. But for Daniel Reyes, time had slowed to a crawl. This hearing wasn't just about paperwork, and it wasn't about compensation. It was about acknowledgement, about proving that the invisible wounds he carried were not weakness, not exaggeration, but the real and lingering consequences of a war that had never truly ended for him. Daniel had filed his first claim for disability 3 years earlier, urged by his sister Claire after she found him sitting on the back porch in the middle of the night. Shirt drenched in sweat, hands trembling around a cigarette he didn't remember lighting. He had resisted at first. He didn't want to be that guy, the one people said was milking the system. But Claire had looked at him with that steady, unflinching gaze that reminded him she'd carried burdens of her own when their father left Danny. She said softly, "You earned this. You don't have to fight alone anymore." But alone was exactly how the process felt. The VA asked for forms, then more forms, then evaluations. He sat across from doctors who measured his pain in minutes, in questionnaires, in checklists. "How often do you have nightmares?" one asked, without looking up from his clipboard. "Do they impair your daily life?" Daniel wanted to laugh. Impair. His entire existence was stitched together with the brittle thread of crowds, of fireworks, of anything that reminded him of the way the world had once sounded when it was collapsing around him. But on paper, it looked neat. Too neat. Denied. The second time, he brought statements from old squad mates. Men who wrote in shaky penmanship about the firefights, about the Humvee, about the bodies Daniel had carried, while rounds cracked the air. The response came in the mail 6 months later. Insufficient corroborating evidence. The words hit harder than shrapnel. As if the lives he'd saved had vanished into dust. As if memory was too fragile to count as truth. The third time, the language cut sharper still. Symptoms do not meet threshold for full disability compensation. Condition not deemed permanently impairing. Daniel read the letter twice, then 3 times. He set it down on the table, staring at it as if it were written in some other language. Not permanently impairing. As though waking every night at 3 a.m. gasping for air was temporary. As though the sweat-drenched sheets could be explained away. As though the guilt he carried for every man he couldn't save would vanish if he just smiled hard enough. Claire had been furious. She stormed into the kitchen, slammed the letter against the counter, and demanded, "What more do they want? Blood. Your body's already given it." But anger wasn't enough to change the system. Paperwork didn't care about fury. Bureaucracy didn't bleed. So Daniel filed an appeal, knowing the odds were slim. The hearing was the last step before he'd have to either start over or give up. That was the weight pressing against his chest now, as he sat at the plaintiff's table. Not the fear of speaking, not the shame of trembling hands, but the knowledge that everything he had endured, the nights he'd fought, battles in silence, could be dismissed with the flick of a pen. He wasn't asking for comfort. He wasn't asking to be excused from the hard work of living. He was asking for recognition, for the country that sent him into fire, to admit that the fire had followed him home. Every rejection had made him feel smaller, less visible, less human. And yet here he was again, not because he believed the system would finally see him, but because he couldn't walk away. Walking away meant accepting that his sacrifice meant nothing. In the silence of the courtroom, Daniel looked down at his shaking hands and whispered a prayer that wasn't really a prayer, just a thought, raw and unpolished. "Please, let someone believe me." What he didn't know not yet was that belief was already walking toward him. It hadn't entered the room, not yet, but soon. And when it did, the lonely fight he thought was as alone would become something larger, something heavier, something the world would no longer be able to ignore. The proceedings began without ceremony, as though the room itself had already decided what the outcome would be. Papers shuffled, the clerk cleared her throat, and Judge Morton leaned forward, peering down from the bench with the casual arrogance of a man who thought he had seen it all. His lips curled at the corners. Not quite a smile, not quite a sneer, but enough to make Daniel feel like a boy standing before the principal's desk, rather than a veteran who had once dragged men from fire. "Sergeant Reyes." The judge began drawing out the title with deliberate slowness. We're here to assess the validity of your claim. This court is not a place for emotion, son. We deal in facts, not feelings. The word son hit Daniel like a slap. It was the same tone he'd heard from drill instructors when they wanted to break you down, except this didn't come with a promise of building him back up. This was meant to belittle, to shrink. Daniel swallowed, his throat dry, and nodded. He wanted to object, to remind the man that his rank had been earned with sweat and blood, not borrowed for sarcasm. But the words lodged in his chest. The state attorney rose smoothly from his chair, his voice crisp and detached. He recited statistics, precedents, case law. To him, Daniel was not a person, but a file number, his trauma nothing more than an asterisk on a form. The claimant, he said, not even bothering with Daniel's name, has failed to provide sufficient evidence of impairment that meets the statutory definition of permanent disability. While he may experience occasional nightmares or anxiety, these do not, according to our experts, prevent him from functioning in society. The gallery murmured faintly, the sound of people shifting in their seats. Daniel's hands clenched under the table. Occasional nightmares. He hadn't slept more than 3 hours straight in years. Anxiety. It wasn't anxiety when your heart pounded so hard at the sound of a car backfiring that you dropped your groceries in the street. It wasn't anxiety when you couldn't walk into a crowded store without mapping every exit in your head. But, to the attorney, it was all clinical, all minimized. Daniel's lawyer, a volunteer from a veterans legal aid group, tried to counter. He spoke about Daniel's service, about his commendations, about the testimonies of his former squad. But Judge Morton wasn't listening. His gaze was elsewhere, on the clock, on his papers, anywhere but on the man sitting before him. When Daniel's lawyer paused, the judge leaned forward and gave a short, sharp laugh. Nightmares and nerves, he said, shaking his head. That's what this case boils down to. Mr. Reyes, plenty of people have trouble sleeping. Plenty of folks get nervous. That doesn't mean they stop living. If we handed out benefits for every bad dream, the treasury would be empty. The words fell like stones into the silence. The chuckle that accompanied them twisted the knife deeper. A few in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. One reporter even lowered her pen. But no one spoke. The courtroom air grew heavy with humiliation. Thick enough for Daniel to taste. He tried to steady himself. To remember Claire's notes, written neatly in the margins of his folder. Breathe. Speak slowly. Tell the truth. He cleared his throat, his voice rough. Your Honor, with respect, these aren't just bad dreams. There, Morton cut him off with a raised hand. I said we deal in facts. What you're describing is subjective. Unless you've got medical evidence, we can't turn sympathy into policy. He leaned back again, as if the matter was already closed. As if Daniel's life could be dismissed in a single shrug. Daniel sat back, heat crawling up his neck. He had faced death without flinching. But this quiet erasure felt worse. To be told, in front of strangers, that his pain was laughable, that his scars were inconvenient. The gavel might as well have already fallen. In that moment, Daniel realized something brutal. He wasn't just fighting for benefits. He was fighting for recognition that what he carried was real, that the cost he paid wasn't imaginary. The bus rattled down the interstate like a beast made of rust and iron, every bump in the road sending a shiver through the rows of chained bodies inside. The windows were narrow, scratched with years of fingernails and names carved by those who had ridden before. Outside, the August sun scorched the asphalt, but inside the prison bus the air was stale, thick with sweat and the sour tang of fear hidden behind bravado. Maya Torres sat in the middle row, wrists cuffed to the chain around her waist, ankles locked in cold steel. The restraints weren't heavy, but they were unforgiving, biting into her skin every time the bus lurched. She tried to keep her breathing even, her shoulders squared, her eyes fixed forward. But she could feel them, the stares. Every inmate on that bus was measuring her, cataloging her size, her silence, her youth. She was 24, small-boned, with dark hair pulled back tight, the way the guards had ordered. Her brown eyes, wide but steady, didn't reveal the churn in her chest. She told herself not to flinch, not to shift under their gazes. If she looked weak now, she knew it would follow her through those gates. Across the aisle, a woman twice. Her size leaned back in her seat, a tattoo of barbed wire crawling up her neck. She smirked, her teeth yellowed, eyes narrowed in lazy amusement. Fresh meat, she muttered, just loud enough for the rows behind her to hear. Laughter rippled through the bus, low and sharp, like the rattle of chains. Maya didn't respond. She kept her gaze locked on the seat in front of her, though her pulse quickened. The lesson was already clear. Silence was not a shield. Silence was an invitation. The bus reeked of unwashed bodies, of grease from the morning breakfast sandwiches the guards had devoured before boarding. The inmates shifted in their seats, metal scraping against metal. Every sound was amplified. The cough of the woman behind her, the nervous tapping of a foot shackled to the floor, the muffled curses as chains tangled. The guards, 2 men in tan uniforms, sat at the front with shotguns resting between their knees. Their presence was heavy but distant. They weren't there to protect. They were there to deliver. Maya tilted her head slightly, her eyes catching the edge of the reflection in the scratched glass beside her. She studied the rows, careful not to turn too far. The bus was a living map of hierarchy. The front seats were occupied by the quiet ones, older women with years carved into their faces. Their silence weighted not by fear, but by knowledge. They sat straight, eyes half closed, conserving energy for what waited on the other side of the gates. The middle rows were different. That was where the predators sat. Women who shifted with restless energy, who smirked and jeered, who already sniffed for weakness like wolves in a cage. Maya could feel them circling her in silence, their whispers carrying through the jolts of the bus start. And then there was the back. The farthest row carried only 3 women, spaced apart like royalty in a kingdom no one dared to enter. One of them sat with her arms spread across the backrest, scarred knuckles resting lazily, her eyes half-shadowed beneath the angle of her brow. She didn't need to speak. She didn't need to laugh. Her presence alone was enough to keep the others from filling the space beside her. Maya didn't know her name yet, but she knew the truth the way you know a storm is coming before you feel the rain. This was someone the yard revolved around. The bus hit a pothole, rattling chains and bones alike. Maya's teeth clicked together, but she kept her composure. She thought of her sister then, of the last time she'd seen her, a visit through glass. A single tear sliding down her cheek before the guard ended it. "Don't let them break you," her sister had whispered through the phone. Maya carried those words now, like armor, thin but steady. The road stretched on, mile after mile, the hum of tires mixing with the low murmur of voices. The guards didn't intervene when the laughter started again, when someone hissed her name after hearing it called at roll. "Torres," they said, stretching it like an insult. She forced herself not to react. Ahead, the skyline of the prison began to rise over. The tree line, a sprawl of concrete and razor wire, guard towers, standing like watchful sentinels. The sun glared off the metal, making the fences shimmer like a mirage. The bus slowed, the hiss of brakes, releasing air sharp as a hissed warning. Maya tightened her jaw. The ride had been its own test, a silent trial of gazes and whispers, of chains and smirks. She had learned more in that hour than any handbook could have taught her. She had seen the hierarchy, the predators, the silence of those who had survived long enough to grow old inside. And now, as the gates creaked open to swallow the bus whole, Maya Torres knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever waited inside, she could not afford to remain the woman they mocked. Not here, not anymore. The bus doors groaned open, and a rush of hot air hit Maya like a wave. It carried the scent of asphalt baking under the sun, mixed with something sharper, disinfectant, sweat, and a faint metallic temps from the fences that rose. Like walls of a fortress, the guards barked orders, their voices clipped and practiced, and the inmates shuffled forward, chains scraping the metal steps. The sound was unmistakable, like the dragging of anchors against steel. Maya followed, her wrists aching where the cuffs dug into her skin, her ankles stiff from the ride. The moment her shoes hit the cracked pavement, she felt eyes on her. The yard wasn't visible yet, only gray walls and the looming gatehouse, but she could sense the watchfulness. The towers stood tall above them, silhouettes of guards, with rifles etched against the blazing sky. The rifles didn't waver. They didn't need to. "Move it," a guard snapped, pressing a hand against Maya's shoulder to steer her forward. She stumbled, catching herself before she fell, and bit back the instinct to glare. It wouldn't help here. Nothing about resistance would help. The line of inmates wound toward the sally port, a double set of gates that clanged open and shut with mechanical indifference. The first set slammed shut behind them, the echo booming through the concrete like the ceiling of a tomb. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the buzz of electricity in the razor wire above. Inside the intake hall, the air shifted. The coolness was artificial, recycled through vents that rattled faintly overhead. The fluorescent lights cast everything in sterile white, flattening faces into pallor. The guards ordered them into lines, men on one side, women on the other. though here, only women filed forward, chained and shuffling, their gazes set anywhere but each other's eyes. Maya stood among them, the weight of the room pressing down. The walls were bare, except for painted lines marking where to stand. The floor was scuffed from decades of boots and chains. A clock ticked on the far wall, indifferent to the lives it measured. One by one, the inmates were processed. Names called, numbers assigned, property taken. A woman ahead of Maya protested when the guard pocketed her necklace, her voice sharp, trembling with desperation. The guard didn't respond. He simply marked something on his clipboard and gestured for her to move. The necklace vanished into a tray that would be locked away, perhaps forever. When it was Maya's turn, she placed her few possessions on the table: a pair of worn sneakers, a photograph of her sister folded in half, a paperback novel with creased pages. The guard handled them with the indifference of a cashier ringing up groceries. Torres, Maya, he read off. Inmate 876,214. The number was spoken flatly, as if it replaced her name. She was told to repeat it back. She did, the words foreign on her tongue. The strip search came next. Cold, humiliating, methodical. Every prisoner endured it, stripped bare under the fluorescent glare, while guards inspected for contraband. Maya clenched her jaw, her cheeks burning, and stared at the floor until it was over. When they handed her the uniform, orange cotton, stiff and oversized, she pulled it on with shaking hands. The cuff snapped closed again, heavier now that the last remnants of her own clothes were gone. The line moved forward, down another hallway. The sound of doors locking and unlocking became a rhythm, echoing off walls that had heard it for decades. Maya kept her eyes straight ahead, but she could feel the scrutiny of guards perched behind glass observation booths. Some looked bored, others smirked, as though waiting for one of them to break down. Finally, the corridor opened into the heart of the facility. The main floor, with its tiers of cells stacked like shelves in a warehouse. Voices echoed from within, shouts, laughter, arguments carried down the concrete. Metal clanged as hands struck against bars, in greeting or warning. The noise was constant, layered, alive. Maya hesitated only a second before the guard prodded her forward again. She felt the gaze of dozens of women from above, their eyes sharp and hungry, scanning the newcomers. The mockery started almost instantly. Whistles, crude remarks, laughter that carried like knives. Maya's cheeks burned, but she didn't look up. She walked as though she hadn't heard. They led her to a narrow staircase, up to the second tier where her cell waited. The metal grating rattled beneath her feet, every step exposing her to the chorus of gears below. The women called her fresh, little girl, easy pickings. Some laughed, some spat. A guard smirked but didn't silence them. At the top, her new home revealed itself. A small cell with flaking paint. A bunk bolted to the wall. A toilet without privacy. The smell of bleach lingered faintly, not enough to cover the underlying odor of rust and old sweat. The guard unlocked the door, pushed her inside, and the clang of steel echoed as it slammed shut. Maya sat on the lower bunk, her wrists resting heavy in her lap. The cell bars vibrated with the laughter still spilling from the tier. She had not spoken a word since stepping off the bus, but silence had not saved her. She knew then that the hierarchy she had glimpsed on the ride was alive here too. Sharper, louder, merciless. That this was not just prison. This was a battlefield. And Maya Torres had just taken her first steps inside. The first time Maya Torres stepped into the prison yard. The sun was already high, glaring down on the cracked asphalt like an unblinking eye. The gates clanged behind her as the line of new arrivals filed out. Shackles removed but watched closely by guards perched in towers. Their rifles tracked every movement, though they didn't need to fire. The yard itself was its own weapon, humming with a tension that never eased. The space was larger than she expected, divided by invisible lines that only the inmates seemed to recognize. To the left, weights clanged as muscled women in sleeveless uniforms grunted through repetitions, their tattoos glistening with sweat. To the right, a group circled a handball court, the ball slapping against the wall in a rhythm that echoed like a heartbeat beyond them. Near the bleachers, women sat in clusters, some smoking, others playing cards on their knees, their eyes sharp and restless. Every patch of ground belonged to someone, though no signs marked the territory. Maya paused, just long enough to feel it, the eyes that snapped toward her the moment she stepped onto the asphalt. Heads tilted, whispers passed like smoke from bench to bench. A few smirks broke into grins. She felt her skin tighten under the weight of their stares. She knew what they saw. A newcomer, too clean, too slight, too unsure of her place. Fresh meat, someone muttered, loud enough to carry. Laughter followed. Maya lowered her gaze, careful not to stumble. She moved toward the benches along the fence, keeping her back against the chain links. The metal vibrated faintly with electricity, though she knew the real barrier wasn't the wire but the towers above. She tried to appear calm, her stride even though every step felt like walking into a storm dot around her. The hierarchy unfolded in layers. She noticed the older inmates first, women with gray streaks in their hair. Their movements deliberate, their silence heavy. They were the survivors, the ones who didn't laugh or taunt, because they no longer needed to prove anything. Their power wasn't loud. It was in the way others gave them space. Then came the middle rank, the mockers, the restless ones. They eyed her like hyenas, circling something weak, waiting to test how far they could push. Maya heard the laughter rise again, sharper now. A cigarette butt flicked through the air, landed near her shoe. She didn't react, not even when someone called out, "You lost, baby girl. Wrong yard." She forced her breathing steady. Every lesson she had taught herself in the holding cell whispered in her head, "Don't flinch, don't talk, don't give them more than silence." But silence felt fragile here, cracking under the weight of so many eyes. And then she saw her. Cassandra Red Malloy. The name hadn't been spoken yet, but Maya knew instinctively that this was the one who ruled. Red sat near the center of the yard, legs stretched, back against the bench, her short-cropped hair glowing copper under the sun. A jagged scar ran from her jawline to her collarbone, pale against her dark skin. She didn't laugh with the others. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any taunt. Women moved differently around her, subtle shifts of deference that Maya caught immediately. They never turned their backs. They never spoke too loudly. And when Red's eyes finally lifted to scan the yard, they dropped theirs instantly, as if caught in something dangerous. Those eyes found Maya. For a moment, Maya felt pinned, as though the entire yard had narrowed to that single gaze. Red didn't smile. She didn't sneer. She simply looked, the weight of her stare sharp as a blade. Then she lowered her gaze again, dismissing Maya as if she weren't worth the effort. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. The dismissal felt heavier than mockery. It marked her as invisible, a nobody. And in a place like this, invisibility was just another form of weakness. Maya shifted against the fence, the chain links rattling faintly behind her. She could feel the laughter still circling, though no one dared step too close yet. She forced herself to remain still, even as sweat rolled down her back, even as her fingers twitched with the urge to clench. The guards on the tower walked their slow circles, rifles slung, eyes bored. They didn't see her. Or if they did, they didn't care. To them, she was just another body in orange, another number on the roll. The yard stretched on, time crawling. The sun seemed to bake every taunt into her skin, every sideways glance pressing against her like hands testing a wall for cracks. By the time the whistle blew, calling them back inside, Maya's chest felt tight. Her silence stretched thin, fell into line with the others. The clang of the gate closing behind them like the slam of a verdict. She had survived her first yard, but survival felt hollow. Already, she knew the truth. The mockery wouldn't stop. The whispers wouldn't fade. Not until she proved she was more than the quiet girl against the fence. And somewhere inside her, the promise she had once made, not to break, not to kneel, rose again. The yard had tested her. Next time, it would demand more. The cafeteria smelled of overcooked beans and bleach. A blend so sharp it clung to the back of Maya's throat as she shuffled forward in the line. Plastic trays clattered. Voices echoed. Guards leaned against the walls pretending to watch. The hum of the place was constant, restless. Everyone knew this was not a meal but a ritual, another arena where lines were drawn, hierarchies reinforced, and the smallest slip could mark you for life. Maya kept her head low, eyes scanning the steam rising from ladles of watery stew and rubbery meat. Her stomach twisted, not with hunger but with the pressure of so many gazes grazing over her. She could feel it again, the mockery, whispers from behind her, laughter cutting through the din. Look at her, can barely hold the tray. She folded in a week. Maya gripped the tray tighter when it slid into her hands, its surface smeared with faint scratches from years of use. She took her plastic spoon, her carton of milk, and stepped aside as the line pressed forward. Already, she could feel the tension rising. She didn't belong to any group, had no allies to wave her over, no seat that offered safety. The Cafeterias stretched in rows of bolted-down tables, each claimed by invisible borders. To the left, women clustered by race, tattoos marking allegiance. To the right, a group of younger inmates laughed loudly, tossing crumbs like weapons. Toward the back, near the guards' indifferent gaze, sat the ones who watched quietly. The older women, their eyes sharp, their silence impenetrable. Maya tried to move toward the far corner, her tray clutched tight. She wanted a seat where she could see the room, where no one could circle behind her, but she didn't make it. A hand shot out, sudden and deliberate, slamming against the edge of her tray. The food toppled, beans sliding across the floor, the milk carton bursting open with a thin white spray. Gasps broke into laughter. The noise was sharp, triumphant, like a pack of wolves catching scent of weakness. Maya froze. Her eyes lifted to the one who had done it. A tall inmate, wiry but strong, with hair pulled tight in cornrows, and eyes glinting with malice. She grinned wide, exposing a gold tooth. "What's the matter, baby girl?" Hands shaking too much. The laughter spread. Women at nearby tables turned to watch, their grins wide, their voices carrying taunts. A guard glanced over, saw the mess, and looked away. Intervention wasn't part of their job. Not here. Maya bent slowly, crouching to pick up her spoon, though her chest burned with humiliation. Her fingers trembled against the slick floor. She tried to keep her face blank, her body steady, but she could feel the heat of every eye on her. The woman leaned down close, her breath sour against Maya's cheek. "Word of advice. Pick a corner and stay there. You don't last long out here looking soft." Maya straightened, gripping the empty tray, her jaw clenched, her eyes steady. She didn't answer. Not a word. But silence had its cost. To the room, it looked like surrender. And surrender was blood in the water. The laughter followed her as she made her way to the far corner. She sat at an empty table, her tray barren, the floor around her still glistening with spilled beans. She placed her hands flat against the table, forcing herself not to shake. From across the room, Red Malloy watched. She hadn't moved during the spectacle, hadn't laughed or jeered like the others. She sat surrounded by her small circle, calm as stone, but her eyes lingered on Maya. The scar on her jaw caught the light as she tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. It was not approval. It was interest. Maya stared down at her hands, her throat tight, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. She wanted to scream, to shove the tray back into the one who had humiliated her, to fight against the weight of every mocking laugh. But she didn't. She couldn't. Not yet. The mess was cleaned eventually. A mop dragged indifferently across the floor by another inmate. The laughter died down, conversations picked up again, and the rhythm of the cafeteria resumed. But the mark had been made. The mockery wasn't just about spilled food. It was about establishing a place in the order. And Maya, whether she wanted it or not, had been cast as the weak one. She sat in silence, her empty tray a symbol of defeat. But, inside her chest, beneath the humiliation, something coiled tighter. She had endured worse before. She remembered her sister's words. The promise whispered through glass. "Don't let them break you." Maya swallowed hard. Her jaw clenched as the laughter echoed faintly in her ears. She told herself this truth. Humiliation was temporary. But weakness, if accepted, would last forever. And as she sat in that corner, beneath Red Malloy's lingering stare, Maya understood. The prison had seen her stumble. Now it was only a matter of time before it demanded to see if she would fall. The yard was a stretch of cracked concrete, ringed by chain-link fencing, topped with coils of razor wire. Beyond it, the field stretched wide and barren, the distant line of trees looking almost like freedom. But for the women inside, the yard was another cage, just larger, with no ceiling but the gray sky above. It was the stage where strength was displayed, alliances tested, and weakness punished without hesitation. Maya walked slowly toward the edges of the crowd, her shoes crunching on grit. It was her first afternoon out in the yard since the cafeteria. Humiliation, and she could feel the shift in the way eyes tracked her. The laughter from that moment still lingered in memory, retold in whispers. She was the one who dropped her tray, the one who said nothing, the one who looked small when it mattered most. She tried to disappear, pressing herself near the fence, but even that choice carried meaning. In prison, nothing was neutral. Where you sat, where you stood, who you spoke to, even who you avoided. Every action was weighed and sorted into the unwritten rules of hierarchy. She noticed groups forming natural barriers in the open space. The women tied to gangs claimed their corners, tattoos vivid against their skin. Others lingered near the basketball court, laughing loudly, making sure the sound carried. And then there was the bench beneath the yard's only patch of shade, where Red Malloy sat like she owned the place. Red's presence was steady, controlled, almost regal. She wore her orange jumpsuit, with the sleeves rolled high, her arms inked with symbols of a life Maya only half understood. Her scarred jaw gave her face a permanent edge, as if smiling were a weakness she'd forgotten long ago. Around her sat 3 women, all older, all with the same look of practiced loyalty. They spoke quietly, but their eyes scanned the yard, like watchmen. Maya tried not to look, but it was useless. Red's gaze found her anyway. It cut across the yard, deliberate and sharp, pinning her in place. Maya's breath caught, her chest tightening. She turned her head quickly, pretending to study the fencing. But she knew Red had seen the tremor in her shoulders, the hesitation in her steps. Minutes stretched. Maya kept her distance, walking the perimeter like she was simply passing time. But the longer she stayed, the more she could feel it. Red's attention hadn't drifted. It was fixed, watching, measuring. Finally, Red rose from her bench. The women around her shifted to make space, their eyes following as she crossed the yard with a slow, confident stride. Conversations faltered, heads turned. No one in the yard ignored Red Malloy when she moved. Maya's throat went dry as Red stopped a few feet away. Up close, she was taller than Maya expected, her frame wiry but strong. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at Maya, the corner of her mouth twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You don't talk much," Red said finally, her voice low. Roughened by years of smoke and authority, Maya swallowed, her lips pressing tight. She forced herself to meet Red's eyes, though every instinct screamed to look away. "Not much to say," Maya replied, her voice steadier than she felt. A chuckle rumbled in Red's chest, dry and humorless. "That's one way to survive. Keep your mouth shut. Maybe people forget you exist." She leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing. "But I don't forget. I see the way they treated you in the cafeteria. I see the way you sit alone." Maya stayed silent. She knew better than to explain herself, to plead or deny. Any word could be twisted, used against her. Red tilted her head, studying her like a puzzle. "Thing is," she continued, "this place doesn't forgive weakness. You let them mark you once, they'll mark you again, and again, until there's nothing left of you." The words dug deep, sharper than the laughter had been. Because they were true. Red finally straightened, her scar catching the sunlight. "I don't waste time on lost causes. But you, I don't know yet." She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. Then she turned, walking back toward her bench with the same unhurried stride. The yard slowly resumed its rhythm. Voices picked up, games continued, and laughter spread again. But for Maya, the world had narrowed, to the sound of her pulse and the echo of Red's voice. She stood frozen by the fence, her hands curled tight at her sides. Red hadn't mocked her. She hadn't threatened her either. Instead, she had seen her. And in prison, being seen by Red Malloy was never casual. It was a warning, or an invitation. Maya didn't know which terrified her more. The next morning, the yard felt heavier. The same cracked concrete, the same rust-stained fencing, the same burnt smell that drifted from the cafeteria vents. But the air carried a different weight for Maya. Red's attention had marked her, and once marked, there was no fading back into the background. Everyone seemed to know it, even if no one said it aloud. Maya walked with her head low, her steps careful, but eyes tracked her more openly now. Some curious, some mocking, some measuring the way predators do before they decide if prey is worth the chase. She kept her breathing even, though her stomach knotted as she replayed the words Red had said the day before. Not a threat, not a promise. Just a question that hadn't been answered yet. It didn't take long for the question to take shape. Near the basketball court, a group of women had gathered, circling to inmates, trading insults that could easily tip into fists. The others watched with grins, hungry for blood or entertainment. Sometimes they were the same thing here. Maya tried to steer clear of the circle, but one of the women at the edge stepped sideways, cutting her off. She was older, with close-cropped hair and a jaw that looked like it had been broken once and never set right. Her eyes narrowed, glinting with cruel amusement. "Fresh meat," she said, loud enough for the circle to hear. "Looks like you found your way out of hiding." Maya's heart pounded. She said nothing, trying to angle away, but the woman moved again, blocking her path. A few others noticed, their attention shifting. The insults at the center of the circle slowed, then stopped, the crowd's focus now drifting outward. You deaf girl, the woman pressed, stepping closer, or just too good to answer. Maya kept her face blank, though her pulse roared in her ears. Any sign of fear, any hint of flinching, would be an invitation. But silence alone wasn't enough either. Silence could be mistaken for weakness. The woman smirked. Leaning in so close, Maya could smell the stale smoke on her breath. Let's see if you can stand. Her hand shot out, shoving Maya hard in the shoulder. Maya stumbled but caught herself before she fell. Her fists curled, not out of aggression but out of instinct, to keep from shaking. Around her, laughter sparked, spreading quickly through the circle. And then the laughter cut off. Not all at once, but like a wave pulled back by a stronger tide. The crowd's attention shifted again, past Maya, past her tormentor. The shade of the bench. Red Malloy hadn't risen. She hadn't moved. She simply sat, her scar catching the light, her eyes fixed on the scene with an expression as sharp as a blade. The woman who had shoved Maya glanced toward Red, her bravado faltering for a beat. The pause was small but obvious. Red lifted her chin slightly. No words, no gesture beyond the tilt of her head. But the meaning was clear enough, a test. The woman turned back to Maya, her smirk thinner now. Well, you gonna stand there? Or, you gonna show us you got a spine? The yard had gone quiet. Even the women in the middle of their argument had stilled, waiting. Maya felt every eye on her, pressing in, demanding an answer. Her breath shuddered, but she held her ground. She didn't swing. She didn't shout. She simply stepped closer, closing the gap until their shoulders almost touched, her voice low but steady. I'm not falling, Maya said. For a moment, the older woman stared at her, searching for the crack that should have been there. Fear, pleading, submission. But Maya's eyes didn't drop. Her body trembled, yes, but her feet stayed planted. Finally, the woman snorted, stepping back with a shake of her head. Not bad, rookie. Not smart, but not bad. She pushed past the circle, muttering something under her breath. The crowd rippled with whispers, the tension breaking into a different kind of energy. Some smirked, some frowned, but all of them had seen it. Maya hadn't crumbled. She hadn't won, but she hadn't folded either. Across the yard, Red leaned back against her bench, her mouth twitching into something unreadable. Approval, maybe. Or calculation. Maya exhaled slowly, her knees weak but her stance unbroken. She had passed something today, not fully, not completely, but enough to keep herself standing. The yard resumed its noise. The circle reformed around the women at its center. But Maya knew. The first test had come, and the first test had ended. And Red Malloy was still watching. The cell block quieted only after lights out. But quiet in prison never meant silence. It meant a shift in sound, the low hum of fluorescent bulbs, the occasional rattle of chains, the soft shuffle of restless feet against concrete floors. To Maya, lying on her thin mattress, it felt like the walls themselves breathed with the weight of secrets. The events in the yard still pulsed through her, refusing to fade. Every time she closed her eyes, she replayed the shove, the laughter, and the moment when Red's stare cut through the crowd like a blade. That single look had turned the encounter into something more than a scuffle. It had marked her. Maya had withstood the test. But the aftermath was still unraveling in shadows she couldn't yet see. From the bunk below, her cellmate stirred. Tanya was older, wiry, and known for keeping her ear to the ground. She wasn't someone who wasted words, which was why Maya froze when she heard Tanya's whisper. You made people talk today. Maya shifted, staring at the ceiling, unsure if she should answer. Silence could be safer. But silence could also mean ignorance, and ignorance could kill you here. What are they saying? Maya asked softly. Tanya chuckled, but there was no humor in it. That Red's got her eye on you. Some think you're being groomed. Others think you won't last the week. Maya swallowed hard, her throat dry. She didn't want Red's eye on her. She didn't want the weight of anyone's attention. She wanted to keep her head down, do her time, and survive. But in prison, wanting meant nothing. Groomed for what? Maya asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Depends who you ask, Tanya muttered. Some say Red's building an army. Some say she just likes collecting strays. Doesn't matter if she's got plans. You'll find out when she wants you to. The mattress springs creaked as Tanya shifted, ending the conversation without warning. Maya stared into the dark, her heart beating faster. Collecting strays. Building an army. Rumors meant power in here, but they also meant danger. Over the next few days, the whispers followed her everywhere. In the chow line, women glanced her way, muttering into their trays. In the laundry room, a pair of inmates stepped aside when she entered, leaving unfinished sentences hanging in the air. Even the guards seemed to watch her differently, their suspicions sharper. At night, the whispers were louder. Voices carried through the vents, echoing half-truths and speculations. Maya learned quickly to listen without reacting. Every name she overheard, every piece of gossip, every rumor stitched together a larger picture of the prison's hidden web. One night, as she sat on the edge of her bunk, Tanya leaned in again. "You hear about Raven?" she asked. Maya shook her head. "She used to be where you are now. New fish," caught Red's eye. "Thought she was special. Thought she was safe. 2 months later, she disappeared." Tanya's voice dropped. "Word. His. They found her in the showers." Neck snapped. The chill that ran down Maya's spine was sharper than the cold air. She stared at Tanya, searching her expression for any sign of exaggeration. But Tanya's face was flat, unreadable. "Why are you telling me this?" Maya whispered. "Because you need to understand. Red's interest ain't protection. It's a spotlight. Some girls burn under it. Some use it. Question is, which one are you?" Maya couldn't answer. The words stuck in her throat. Later, as sleep slipped further from her, she thought of the faces in the yard, the laughter that had cut short, and the way Red had leaned back with that unreadable twitch at her lips. Maybe Tanya was right. Maybe Red wasn't offering safety at all. Maybe she was baiting the wolves. And Maya had already stepped into the circle. The whispers in the dark no longer felt like background noise. They were warnings, clues, and judgments all at once. Every word carried a message. Survive, but never. Blindly. Maya closed her eyes, forcing her breath steady, knowing dawn would bring new eyes, new rumors, and maybe another test. In this place, darkness didn't end with the night. It lingered, settling into every corner, waiting for the moment you forgot it was there. The morning bell clanged through the cell block, its metallic echo bouncing down the concrete corridors. Maya rose slowly, her body still sore from restless nights and the constant edge of anxiety. Tanya was already awake, perched on the lower bunk, tying her shoes with practiced indifference. "You'll want to keep your eyes open today," Tanya muttered, without looking up. "They like to test the new ones. After lights out whispers get too loud." Maya didn't ask who they were. She already knew. The line to the chow hall was the same as always. Women shuffling forward in gray uniforms. Trays clutched tight, guards watching with detached boredom. But Maya noticed something new in the way heads turned. It wasn't casual curiosity anymore. It was calculation. At breakfast, the seat beside her stayed empty, though the tables around her were crowded. That empty space was louder than any insult. It told her she was being isolated, placed under observation. She ate quickly, refusing to let her hands shake, and returned her tray without comment. Work assignments were posted near the guard station after breakfast. Maya scanned the list and saw her name next to laundry. Subloxy. A few women behind her chuckled. One leaned in just close enough to murmur, "Good luck, fresh fish," before moving on. The laundry room was hotter than the rest of the prison's steam rising from industrial washers that rattled like they were ready to fall apart. Inmates hauled bags of uniforms, tossing them carelessly onto tables where others sorted and folded. It seemed ordinary enough at first. Then Maya noticed the silence when she walked in, the kind of silence that meant everyone was waiting for something. Red wasn't there, but her lieutenants were. A tall woman with tattoos crawling up her neck stepped forward, arms folded. They called her Diesel, though Maya didn't know why. Diesel didn't speak right away. She just studied Maya with a cold grin. Finally, she tossed a bag of uniforms at Maya's feet. "Sort it. Fold it. Don't screw it up." The bag was heavier than it looked. Maya knelt, pulling out damp uniforms, trying to copy the neat stacks she saw on nearby tables. But each time she folded one, someone bumped the table, sending the pile tumbling. Laughter followed. Maya picked the clothes up again, her face burning, her hands steady, despite the humiliation. She didn't look at them. She didn't give them the reaction they wanted. After the third time, Diesel leaned close. "You think you can just walk into Red's sight and act like you're untouchable? You prove yourself, or you break." Maya kept folding. She didn't answer. The tests escalated. A uniform drenched with extra water dropped onto her pile. A ripped sleeve shoved her way. A shove to her shoulder hard enough to make her stumble. Each act was small enough that a guard wouldn't interfere, but heavy enough to press her resolve. Finally, Diesel picked up one of the folded stacks and dropped it in the grime near the washer. Oops, the laughter rippled again. Maya crouched, picking up the uniforms, her jaw clenched. She wanted to scream, wanted to fight, but she heard Tanya's voice in her head. Survive, but never blindly. So she didn't lash out. She didn't beg. She finished folding the pile and carried it to the cart without a word. When her shift ended, the silence was different. No more laughter, no more deliberate shoves. Diesel just watched her with that same grin, but her eyes had shifted a flicker of something that wasn't mockery. Maybe respect. Maybe recognition. Back in the yard that afternoon, Maya caught sight of Red sitting on the steps, surrounded by her circle. Red's gaze lifted just long enough to meet Maya's, then dipped back down. It was no gesture of welcome. It was acknowledgement. The test wasn't about laundry. It wasn't about folding clothes. It was about seeing whether Maya would break under pressure or endure it. And now she knew. The whispers weren't just rumors. They were invitations to battles no one announced out loud. That night, as she lay on her bunk, the sounds of prison filled the dark again. But this time, Maya wasn't just listening. She was preparing because, if this was only the first test, the next one would be worse. And she had to be ready. The prison yard spread wide under the dull gray sky, a place where tension simmered just beneath the surface. Razor wire gleamed at the edges, and the watchtower loomed above like an unblinking eye. Maya walked out with the others, trying to keep her steps even, her face unreadable. Tanya walked a few paces behind her, not close enough to draw attention, but not far enough to abandon her. Today's the day, she murmured low, almost lost in the shuffle of bodies. If they're curious, you'll find out soon. Maya didn't need her to explain who they were. Red's circle had been the unspoken center of every whispered warning since she'd arrived. The older inmates treated the group with cautious distance, while the younger ones either gravitated toward it or shrank away entirely. Red didn't just rule with violence, she ruled with perception, deciding who mattered and who didn't. Maya sat at a bench in the corner, hands folded loosely in front of her, pretending to watch a game of handball across the yard. She wasn't there for the game. She was watching the way groups formed and dissolved, how conversations cut short when Red's women passed by, how the guards rarely stepped too close when the red-haired leader herself moved. It didn't take long. A shadow fell across the bench, and Maya looked up slowly. Diesel stood there, flanked by another woman Maya hadn't seen before, stocky inmate with pale eyes and a scar across her chin. "Boss wants a word," Diesel said flatly. It wasn't a request. Maya rose, ignoring the twist of her stomach, and followed them to the steps where Red sat. Her red hair, tied back in a rough knot, caught the light like a warning signal. Around her, four women lingered, silent, watchful, coiled like springs waiting for her command. Red looked up when Maya stopped in front of her. She didn't smile, didn't speak right away. She just studied Maya, her eyes sharp and unflinching. "So, this is the one who doesn't scare easy," Red finally said. Her voice was low, even, but it carried weight. "I hear you didn't fold when Diesel pushed you." Maya kept her gaze level. "I came here to serve my time. That's all." That earned a flicker of amusement across Red's face. "Everyone comes here saying that, but time has a way of choosing sides for you." She leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees. "The question is, which side do you end up on?" One of the women at her flank, a tall inmate with braided hair, sneered. "She looks soft, won't last a month." Red didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small packet of instant coffee. She tossed it onto the ground at Maya's feet. "Pick it up." The yard seemed to hush. Maya bent slowly, picked up the packet, and held it out to Red. Red shook her head. "Keep it." It wasn't about the coffee. Maya understood that instantly. It was about obedience, about whether she would bow in front of an audience. By keeping the packet, she'd accepted something: acknowledgement, maybe even a thread of protection, but also the burden that came with it. Red leaned back again. "She do," she said simply. The circle shifted, tension easing. But the message was clear. Maya had just been marked. As the group dispersed, Tanya appeared at her side, her face unreadable. "You realize what that means, right?" Maya nodded, slipping the packet into her pocket. "It means the tests aren't over. They're just beginning." That night, as she lay in her bunk, the packet of coffee rested under her pillow like a weight. She hadn't asked for it, hadn't wanted it. But now it tied her name to Red's in a way she couldn't shake. In the silence, Maya thought back to her first days, the stares, the whispers, The games in the laundry room. None of it had been random. They'd all been leading to this moment. The moment Red noticed her, and in prison, being noticed could be either a shield or a death sentence. The following morning began like any other metallic clatter. As doors rolled open, the guards barked orders, the shuffle of women moving down the corridor in lines that felt both chaotic and mechanical. But for Maya, everything had shifted. The weight of the coffee packet in her pocket had marked her as someone who had been chosen. It wasn't protection, not yet. It was scrutiny, and scrutiny was dangerous. Breakfast in the chow hall was as grim as always. Watery eggs, toast that tasted like cardboard, and lukewarm coffee that was more bitterness than warmth. Maya carried her tray to an empty spot, keeping her back to the wall like Tanya had taught her. Tanya slid into the seat across from her moments later, her eyes darting briefly toward the table near the center, where Red and her circle always sat. "They're watching you," Tanya muttered between mouthfuls. Maya didn't need to look. She could feel the weight of Red's attention, subtle but unmistakable. She forced herself to eat slowly, measured, careful not to betray nerves. Around her, the hum of conversation filled the room, but it was brittle-like. Everyone was waiting for something to break. It broke sooner than Maya expected. Diesel moved first. She left Red's table with her tray, sauntered across the chow hall, and stopped behind Maya. Without a word, she tipped her tray forward, spilling the watery eggs and soggy toast across Maya's back and lap. The hall erupted in laughter and scattered shouts. Maya froze for a beat, the slimy warmth dripping down her jumpsuit. She heard Tanya's sharp intake of breath across the table. Diesel leaned down, her voice low but loud enough to carry. "Looks like you're Red's new favorite toy. Let's see if you're worth the trouble." The laughter swelled, guards pretending not to notice. Maya stood slowly, her chair scraping back across the floor. Diesel straightened, ready for whatever reaction came. Maya set her untouched tray down carefully. "You done?" she asked, her tone steady, almost casual. That seemed to amuse Diesel. Not even close. She shoved Maya hard in the shoulder, expecting her to stumble, to show weakness. But Maya didn't stumble. She caught her balance, her jaw tight. She took a breath, then moved. Her fist connected with Diesel's midsection, sharp and fast, catching the bigger woman off guard. The impact sent Diesel doubling forward, air leaving her lungs in a grunt. The room went silent. The laughter cut off like someone had pulled a plug. Diesel straightened, rage flooding her face. She swung wide, but Maya ducked, letting the punch graze past her ear. The next swing was lower, aimed at Maya's ribs, but she pivoted, catching Diesel's arm and shoving her weight forward. The move sent Diesel sprawling against a nearby table. Trays clattering to the floor. Chaos filled the hall. Shouts, whistles, the pounding of boots, as guards finally decided to intervene, break it up. One barked, rushing forward with his baton raised. Another guard grabbed Maya by the arm, yanking her backward, while two more struggled to restrain Diesel as she kicked and cursed. The fight was over as quickly as it had started, but its echo filled the space. Inmates whispered, heads craning, eyes darting from Diesel to Maya to Red. As the guards dragged Diesel toward the exit, Red stayed seated at her table, unmoving, but her eyes found Maya's, sharp and unreadable. She didn't smile, didn't frown. She simply watched. Maya's chest heaved with adrenaline, but she forced herself to stand straight, to meet Red's stare without flinching. The silence between them was louder than the noise that had preceded it. Later, back in her cell, Maya sat on the edge of her bunk, her hands trembling despite her calm exterior. Tanya hovered near the door, her voice hushed. "You know what you just did?" Maya exhaled slowly. "I made my choice." The truth was clearer now. Red hadn't tested her with the coffee. Diesel had been the real test. The first strike meant to measure her worth, and Maya had answered. The prison had rules no handbook could teach, and Maya had just written her name into them in ink that wouldn't fade. The yard was different after the fight. Not outwardly, women still clustered in their usual groups, guards still paced with hands on their belts, and the razor wire still glistened under the afternoon sun. But beneath the familiar routine, there was a current that hadn't been there before. Maya could feel it the moment she stepped outside. Heads turned, eyes lingered longer than usual, and conversations stopped mid-sentence when she walked past. She kept her stride even, her posture upright. To falter now would mean undoing everything that had happened in the chow hall. Diesel had been carried out cursing, and though Maya hadn't walked away untouched, she had stood her ground. And in a place where survival was measured by perception, as much as strength, that mattered. Tanya stayed close. her arms folded across her chest, as though to shield herself from the new weight of attention. "You're marked now," she said under her breath. "People are gonna want to know if you're tough or lucky." Maya glanced at her. "And which one do you think I am?" Tanya gave a dry laugh. "Doesn't matter what I think. Matters what Red decides." Red hadn't made her move yet. She hadn't spoken to Maya, hadn't acknowledged her openly. But her silence was loud. Diesel was one of Red's most loyal enforcers, and Maya had humiliated her in front of everyone. That wasn't something the yard forgot quickly. A group of women loitering by the fence smirked as Maya passed. One of them, thin with sharp eyes and tattoos crawling up her neck, called out, "Thought the new girl was gonna fold. Guess she's got teeth after all." The others chuckled, some mocking, some approving. Maya didn't respond. She had already learned the rule: words could drag you into fights quicker than fists. She kept her eyes forward, her hands loose at her sides, every sense alert. Later, in the mess line for dinner, the whispers followed her. Some admired the way she had stood up. Others said she had made the mistake of challenging a system older than her sentence. Either way, her name was being spoken, and in prison, that was as dangerous as it was useful. When the doors finally locked that night, Tana sat cross-legged on her bunk, staring at Maya. "You need to decide," she said. "Are you going to try and walk neutral, or are you going to choose a side?" Maya leaned back against the wall, exhaustion creeping through her bones. "What happens to people who try to stay neutral?" Tanya shrugged. "They get chewed up by both sides. This place doesn't like gray." The words sat heavy in the cell. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, picturing the look on Diesel's face when she had doubled over, the shock in the eyes of the women watching, and the unreadable calm of Red's stare. The next day, the guards pulled Maya aside during yard call. She was led to the infirmary, where Diesel sat with a split lip and bandaged ribs, glaring at her from across the room. The nurse scribbled notes, indifferent to the tension in the air. "You think this is over?" Diesel hissed, her voice raw, but steady. "You're dead next time." Maya didn't answer. The guard ushered her out, but the words followed her back to the block. Diesel might have been injured, but her threat was real. And in a place where threats often became promises, Maya knew she had to be ready. That night, lying awake on the thin mattress, Maya thought of the rules Tanya had explained, of the currency Red dealt in, and of the narrow path between survival and destruction. The fight had given her visibility she hadn't asked for. And now, every move she made would either cement her place or bury her. The aftermath wasn't silence. It was the steady hum of anticipation, the waiting for what came next. In the prison's rhythm, Maya had become part of the beat, and she couldn't step off without being crushed. The morning began like any other in the prison yard. The guards lined the women up, counted them twice, and then swung open the gates that led to the cracked asphalt, where everyone went to breathe air that was only slightly less suffocating than the air inside. The clatter of chains and boots echoed as the women spread out, each group returning to its corner of the yard. Some jogged the perimeter, some sat hunched on benches, while others gravitated toward the tables, where cards, cigarettes, and dominance were traded. Maya walked out with Tanya beside her, the sun hot on their shoulders. She knew the moment she stepped onto the asphalt that today was different. Conversations cut short when she appeared. Eyes tracked her as though the air itself had shifted around her. The fight with Diesel hadn't been forgotten, it had been digested, replayed, and passed along until it became bigger than it was. Maya was no longer just another inmate trying to blend into the background. She was a test waiting to happen. At the far side of the yard, near the fence topped with spirals of razor wire, Red sat like a queen on her throne. She was perched at a table surrounded by her closest followers, cigarette dangling between two fingers, her hair the unmistakable blaze that had earned her the name. Her crew flanked her like soldiers guarding their commander. When she spotted Maya, she didn't smile, didn't frown, she simply lifted her chin. The faintest gesture that commanded silence among her circle. Tanya muttered under her breath, "Here it comes." Red rose from the bench, flicking ash to the ground. She walked slowly, deliberately, as though the entire yard was a stage and everyone present her audience. She didn't need to raise her voice when she spoke. The hush that fell across the women made sure her words carried. "You made a mess in my house," Red said, her gaze locked on Maya. "Diesel was mine. You don't touch what's mine without answering for it." Maya's pulse thudded, but she kept her expression even. She had learned already that weakness was the one thing you couldn't afford to show here. "Diesel came for me," she said, evenly. "I defended myself." The yard murmured, a ripple of voices like wind through leaves. Some nodded at Maya's words, others waited, curious to see how Red would answer. Red stepped closer, stopping just a foot away. The guards watched from their posts along the fence, but didn't move. They only intervened when blood hit the ground. Everything else was entertainment. "You've got fire," Red said, her voice low enough that only the closest women could hear, though silence carried it to the edges of the yard. "But fire without direction burns out fast. You think you can walk through here on your own? You'll learn quick what happens to strays." Maya's eyes didn't waver. "I'm not looking to be anyone's dog." For the first time, Red's slow, dangerous curl of her lips. The crowd leaned in, sensing the weight of the moment. Then, suddenly, Red swung. Her fist cut through the air, aiming straight for Maya's jaw. Maya had been waiting, tension coiled in her body since the first step onto the yard. She ducked, the punch grazing past her cheek. Instinct took over. She drove her shoulder forward, slamming into Red's chest, sending both of them stumbling back into the dirt. The yard erupted. Women screamed. Some cheered. Others backed away to clear a circle. The guards shouted, but none moved to break it up yet. Maya scrambled to her feet first, fists raised. Red was quick to rise, blood trickling from her split lip, but her grin only widened. They circled each other like predators, each waiting for the other to falter. Red lunged again, and this time Maya met her head-on. The clash was violent, raw, the kind of fight that wasn't about winning or losing, but about sending a message. Maya's knuckles split against Red's cheekbone, and Red's elbow drove hard into Maya's ribs. Each blow was a test, each strike a declaration. By the time the guards stormed in, batons raised, both women were panting, battered, but still standing. Neither had fallen. Neither had surrendered. Dragged apart, Maya caught Red's eyes one last time before the guards shoved her toward the wall. Red was grinning through the blood, and in her gaze there was no defeat, only recognition. The yard had seen enough. Maya wasn't invisible anymore. She was part of the story now, and every inmate knew it. The showdown hadn't ended anything. It had only begun the war. The fight in the yard landed. Maya where Tanya had warned her it would. In front of the warden. The guards dragged her down the sterile corridor. Wrists bound, boots scuffing the polished concrete. The sound echoed, each step hammering her nerves into place. She had expected the whole, maybe a few weeks of solitary, to remind her who was in control here. Instead, they told her the warden wanted a word. That was worse. The office was large, by prison standards, the kind of space meant to project authority. The blinds were half closed, slats letting in thin beams of sunlight that cut across the heavy desk. Books lined the shelves behind him, log texts, reports, binders stacked like the weight of the system itself. The man seated there was Warden Carrick, broad-shouldered, with thinning hair and a jaw clenched so tight it looked carved from stone. His uniform was crisp, every button in place, the image of order. Maya was shoved into the chair across from him. She kept her back straight, her eyes forward. She had learned that much don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you shrink. Carrick didn't speak right away. He studied her as if she were an unusual specimen, something that didn't quite fit the mold. Finally, he leaned back, folding his hands. "Maya Torres," he said slowly, as though testing the weight of her name. 2 months in my prison, and already you're making waves." She didn't answer. Anything she said here could be twisted, held against her. Silence was safer. He tapped a file on the desk. Her file. "You've been busy. First Diesel, now read. You've either got a death wish, or you think you're smarter than everyone else in here." "I defended myself," Maya said evenly. Her voice was calm, but inside she felt the same coil of tension that had carried her through every fight so far. Carrick's eyes narrowed. "Defending yourself is one thing. Standing up to Red in front of the entire yard, that's something else. You embarrassed one of the most influential inmates under my roof. That creates problems. Problems I have to manage." Maya met his stare. "I didn't ask for a spotlight." "No," Carrick said, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. "But you've got one now. And whether you like it or not, you're a player in a game that's bigger than you." He stood, walked around the desk, and leaned against its edge, arms crossed. "Here's the truth. This place runs on balance. Red keeps her people in line. I let her in return. Order is maintained. Guards don't get shanked every other day, and the administration looks good on paper. You upset that balance, Torres, that makes you dangerous." Maya felt her throat tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "So what happens now? You lock me up until I'm quiet again?" Carrick studied her, expression unreadable. Solitary would be the easy answer. But you're interesting. You don't act like the others. You don't posture. You don't break. I've seen people like you before. They either end up in the morgue, or they end up running the block. He straightened, his eyes hard. The question is, which one are you going to be? Maya said nothing. She couldn't tell if he was warning her, or testing her. Carrick sighed, as though the conversation was a burden he hadn't wanted. He tapped the desk again. For now, I'm sending you back to the block. But understand this: if you become more trouble than you're worth, I'll bury you so deep you'll forget what the sun looks like. The guards yanked her to her feet. As they dragged her back toward the cell block, Maya's mind raced. The warden had made it clear. She wasn't just another inmate anymore. She was a variable, a disruption to the carefully balanced scales. Back in the block, Tanya was waiting. She looked at Maya's face, searching for answers. What did he say? Maya lowered herself onto the bunk, the thin mattress groaning beneath her weight. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment before answering. He said, "I'm dangerous." Tanya swallowed. He's right. But dangerous cuts both ways. You need to figure out which side you're cutting for. Maya closed her eyes, the words echoing in her mind. The warden had given her no punishment, no mercy, just a choice, disguised as a warning. And in this place, every choice was survival. The day after her meeting with Warden Carrick, Maya walked into the chow hall and felt the difference immediately. The room was as noisy and chaotic as ever, trays clattering, voices overlapping, guards barking orders from the edges, but underneath it all, there was a current of tension that seemed to follow her like a shadow. Heads turned when she entered, some eyes wide with curiosity, others narrowed with calculation. Tanya walked close at her side, whispering low, "You're on everyone's radar now. Some see you as a challenge, others as an opportunity. Doesn't matter which, they'll all be watching." Maya kept her expression neutral, but her chest felt tight. She had never wanted to be noticed. Invisibility had been her shield. Now it was gone. She carried her tray through the aisles, aware of the invisible lines that cut through the room. Each table belonged to someone, crews marked by skin, by neighborhood, by loyalty forged in years of confinement. Trespassers weren't tolerated. Maya had learned quickly that choosing a seat was choosing an allegiance. She and Tanya sat at their usual table near the middle, a spot that wasn't claimed by any one group, but tolerated by all. Neutral ground. But even as she sat, she could feel the eyes from across the hall. Red's crew occupied their usual place along the far wall. Red herself wasn't eating, just sitting, hands folded in front of her, her cheek still bruised from the fight. She didn't look at Maya directly, but every woman at her table did. Their stares were sharp, promising that the fight in the yard wasn't finished. At the opposite side, another group watched too. A smaller crew, less flashy, but no less dangerous. Their leader was a woman named Burke, heavyset with pale eyes that never seemed to blink. She had a reputation for trading favors with guards, a quiet power broker in a world built on noise. Burke studied Maya with an interest that made her skin crawl, not hatred, not rivalry, but calculation. As Maya lifted her fork, Tanya leaned closer. "You feel it. The ground's shifting. Red won't let this go. But Burke, she sees a piece on the board she might want to move." Maya forced down a bite of bland potatoes, her jaw tense. She didn't answer, but she knew Tanya was right. Halfway through the meal, the first test came. One of Red's lieutenants, a wiry woman named Spike, with tattoos curling up her neck, stood from Red's table and walked toward them. The hall quieted a little, attention shifting. Spike dropped her tray directly on Maya's table, food sloshing across the surface. "You're sitting in the wrong seat, Torres," she said, voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Maya didn't move. "I've been sitting here for weeks," Spike sneered. "Things change. You've been promoted. You want to keep eating in peace. You ask Red's permission first." Tanya's hand tightened on her fork, ready, but Maya kept her gaze steady on Spike. She knew the room was waiting to see if she'd fold or stand. Every choice had ripples. "I'm not asking anyone's permission to eat," Maya said, her voice calm but carrying. A hush fell. Spike's eyes narrowed. For a moment, it looked like the fight would break out right there. Trays flying, guards rushing in. But then Spike smirked, lifted her tray with exaggerated slowness, and backed away. "Enjoy your lunch," she said, dripping sarcasm. She turned and walked back to Red's table, whispering something that drew laughter from the group. Maya exhaled, quietly, her pulse racing, though she hadn't moved. Tanya leaned in again. You just told the whole room you're not bending. That's strength. But strength paints a target. Maya knew it was true. Across the hall, Burke was still watching, lips curved in the faintest smile, like a predator waiting for a better angle. Red's crew was seething, their leader unmoving, her silence louder than words. The rest of the meal passed in uneasy quiet. But Maya understood. She was no longer floating in the middle. The lines had been drawn, and whether she wanted it or not, she was standing on one of them. Back in the block that night, as she lay staring at the ceiling, Maya thought of the warden's words. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was a disruption, a fracture in the balance of power. And fractures in this place didn't stay small. They spread until something broke. She didn't know yet what would break. Red, Burke, or herself. But she knew the day was coming, when the yard, the hall, the entire prison would demand an answer. And when that day came, she would either rise or be buried. The prison had a rhythm. One Maya was beginning to hear, even in her sleep. The clang of metal doors at dawn, the bark of guards counting heads, the shuffle of chains on the floor during movement. Beneath that rhythm, though, was a second pulse, the schemes and grudges of inmates, the quiet plotting that made every day unpredictable. After the encounter in the chow hall, Maya knew the next move wouldn't be hers. Red's silence had been deliberate, and silence in prison was never Pisit was planning. Tanya warned her the same night. Bell test, you again? And it won't be a tray this time. The test came 3 days later. Maya had been assigned to laundry duty, the steaming hot basement where machines churned endlessly, turning piles of filthy uniforms into stacks of folded gray cloth. It was tedious, exhausting work, but safer than kitchen detail, where knives had a way of disappearing. At least that's what Maya thought. The room smelled of bleach and damp cloth. She loaded a machine, sweat clinging to her neck in the suffocating heat, when 2 women slipped in behind her. She recognized one immediately: Spike, Red's lieutenant, the same one who had made a scene in the chow hall. The other was larger, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a jagged scar running down her arm. The door clicked shut. Torres, Spike said, her voice carrying over the thrum of machines. Funny how you keep forgetting your place. Maya turned slowly, arms loose at her sides. She scanned the room, noting the exit blocked, the steam fogging the corners, the clang of machinery masking sound. If a fight broke out here, no one would hear until it was too late. I'm just doing my work, Maya said evenly. That's your problem, Spike sneered. You think work makes you safe. But respect is what keeps you breathing in here, and you don't have it. The larger woman stepped forward, cracking her knuckles. Red says, it's time you learned. Maya's pulse quickened, but she forced her face to stay calm. She had learned long ago that fear shown was fear exploited. The machines kept rumbling, each second stretching. When Spike lunged, Maya sidestepped, the move instinct more than thought. The larger woman came next, swinging heavy, trying to pin her against the dryer. Maya ducked low, her shoulder slamming into the woman's ribs, using her own momentum to shove her back. The room erupted in chaos, fists flying, the clang of bodies against steel. It wasn't about winning. Maya knew that. It was about surviving long enough to walk out. She blocked Spike's jab with her forearm, felt the sting travel up her bones, then countered with a sharp elbow to the jaw. The bigger woman grabbed her by the collar, nearly lifting her off her feet. But Maya drove her knee into the woman's stomach, breaking free. The fight spilled across the laundry floor, piles of uniforms scattering. For a moment, it seemed Maya would be overwhelmed too, against one both seasoned brawlers. But then the door burst open. Break it up. A guard's voice boomed, echoing over the machines. Flashlights cut through the steam. Hands dragged them apart, forcing them down. Spike spat blood on the floor, glaring at Maya with venom. This isn't over, she hissed, even as her wrists were yanked behind her back. Maya was hauled to her feet, her chest heaving, sweat and adrenaline mixing in her veins. She caught Tanya's eyes outside the doorway, wide with worry. The guards shoved Maya against the wall. You again, one muttered, disgust in his tone. You just can't keep out of trouble, can you? But Maya didn't answer. She knew trouble had found her, not the other way around. This hadn't been random, it had been arranged. A test from Red, a message to the yard. When the guards finally marched her back to the block, bruised but still standing, the whispers spread like fire. Some saw weakness in being targeted, others saw strength in surviving. Either way, Maya's name traveled faster than she could keep up with. That night, lying on her bunk, she understood the truth Tanya had told her from the start. In prison, There was no neutral. You were always playing someone's game even when you thought you weren't. And now, whether she liked it or not, she was a piece Red had tried to break off the board. But pieces could move in unexpected ways. And Maya wasn't ready to be taken out. The fight in the laundry earned Maya a trip to solitary, though only for 24 hours. The guards decided she hadn't started it, but rules demanded some punishment. When she was released, her body ached from bruises, but the whispers followed her louder than ever. Surviving 2 setups in as many weeks had made her impossible to ignore. On the morning she returned to her block, a guard appeared. At her cell, "Torres, warden wants to see you." The words twisted her stomach. Inmates rarely saw the warden unless they were in deep trouble or had something the warden wanted. She exchanged a quick glance with Tanya, who only raised an eyebrow. "Careful," she muttered. They led Maya through corridors that seemed quieter than usual, past watchtowers and locked doors, until she stood before the heavy oak door of the warden's office. Inside, the room smelled of leather and tobacco. Warden Carrick sat behind a wide desk, papers neatly stacked, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Maya Torres," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please, sit." Maya stayed. Standing, she had seen too many games to trust courtesy in this place. "Why am I here?" The warden leaned back, studying her like a specimen under glass. "Because you've done something very rare. You've managed to make Red nervous. That's not easy." Maya's jaw tightened. "I didn't come here to make anyone nervous. I came here to do my time." Carrick chuckled softly, though his eyes remained sharp. "That's the thing about prison, Torres. Time isn't all you serve. You serve the balance. You've disrupted it." He steepled his fingers, voice lowering. "Red runs the yard. She keeps order the way wolves keep order, through fear. The guards tolerate it, because it makes our jobs easier. But fear breeds challenges. And now, you've become one." Maya crossed her arms, refusing to be pulled into his rhythm. "So what do you want from me?" The warden leaned forward. "Information. I want to know what Red is planning. Who she's moving against. Give me that. And I make sure the next fight set up for you doesn't happen." Simple. The offer hung in the air, thick and dangerous. Maya knew better than to answer quickly. To accept would mean betraying the unspoken code that held the yard together. To refuse would mean the warden letting her be crushed under the next setup. Either way, she was being asked to gamble with her survival. She chose silence. Carrick smirked, tapping a pen against his desk. "You think you can stay neutral? You can't, not here. Neutral gets buried." He leaned back again, casual as though discussing the weather. "You've got potential, Torres. You show resilience, discipline that can be shaped, but not if you're in the infirmary every week." Maya finally sat, her body stiff. "You're not asking me. You're warning me. Call it what you like," the warden said smoothly. "But I'll give you time to think." "Not long. Red's not a patient woman." The meeting ended as abruptly as it began. 2 guards escorted her back through the corridors, the silence pressing heavier than before. When she returned to her cell, Tanya was waiting, perched on the edge of Maya's bunk. "What did he want?" Tanya asked. Maya hesitated before answering. "He wants me to be his eyes." Tanya exhaled sharply. "Figures. That man's been trying to dig under Red's empire for years. You're just his newest tool." "I'm not anyone's tool," Maya said firmly, though doubt gnawed at her. Tanya leaned closer, her voice low. "Then you'd better decide fast. Because Red will test you again. And if Carrick doesn't get what he wants, he'll let her." That night, Maya lay awake staring at the ceiling. The warden's words echoed in her mind, colliding with Tanya's warning. She was caught between 2 predators, each waiting for her to move first. The prison had closed in around her. The walls no longer just concrete, but choices narrowing to blades. And Maya knew the next step she took toward Carrick or away from him would set the course of everything that followed. The prison yard was a place of routine. Concrete benches lined the edges, weights clanged in a rusted corner, and guards watched from their towers with rifles slung casually across their shoulders. Yet for the inmates, the yard was more than exercise, it was theater. Every stare, every laugh, every movement declared alliances and rivalries. It was where reputations were built, and where they were destroyed. When Maya stepped through the gates that morning, she felt the shift before she saw it. The usual hum of chatter dropped into a low murmur. Heads turned. Clusters of women moved apart, creating a circle that stretched wider with each passing second. The air grew heavier, the sun beating down on the cracked asphalt, until it became obvious what was about to happen. Red was waiting in the center, Her broad frame filled the space. Her arms folded across her chest, tattoos crawling down both biceps. Like armor, she didn't need to speak. Her presence carried the weight of command. Around her, lieutenants like Spike leaned against the fence, grinning with anticipation. The setup wasn't subtle anymore. It was public. Tanya brushed past Maya, whispering sharply, "This is it. She's calling you out." Maya's stomach tightened, but her face betrayed nothing. She had known this moment was coming. Red had tested her through others, but those tests had failed. Now the queen of the yard had stepped forward herself. "Torres," Red's voice boomed across the circle, thick with challenge. "You've been walking like you own this place. Time we settled that." The crowd pressed closer, the guards watching but not interfering. Fights in the yard were part of the system. They only stepped in when blood was already on the ground. Maya walked slowly toward the center. Her chains from intake long gone, but the weight of them still clinging in memory. She stopped a few feet from Red, locking eyes. "I don't want your throne," Maya said flatly. Red smirked, her teeth flashing. "Doesn't matter what you want. You've already threatened it, just by standing tall." She rolled her shoulders, cracking her neck. "So let's see if you can keep standing." The crowd roared as the first move came. Red swung heavy, aiming to end it early. Maya ducked, the fist grazing past her cheek. She countered with a sharp jab to the ribs, but Red barely flinched. The woman was built like a wall, her strength undeniable. Maya knew she couldn't match power with power. She shifted, circling, forcing Red to follow, making her burn energy. The yard echoed with shouts, bets being made, insults hurled. The noise of 100 women hungry for blood. Red charged again, this time catching Maya's shoulder and slamming her against the fence. Pain shot down her arm, but Maya gritted her teeth, driving her knee upward into Red's thigh. The bigger woman stumbled back, just enough for Maya to break free. The fight stretched on, sweat dripping, fists colliding with flesh. Maya relied on precision small strikes, quick dodges, while Red relied on brute force. Each time Red missed, frustration carved deeper lines across her face. At last, the moment came. Red swung wide, her balance tipping. Maya stepped inside, her elbow slamming into Red's jaw with all the force she could muster. The sound cracked across the yard like a gunshot. Red staggered, eyes wide, before collapsing to one knee. The yard fell silent. Maya didn't move to finish it. She simply stood, chest heaving, her gaze never leaving Red's. It wasn't victory she wanted, it was survival without submission. Slowly, Red spat blood onto the ground and rose back to her feet. She stared at Maya, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. Then, to everyone's shock, she gave a short nod. "Not weak," Red muttered, her voice low but carrying. "Not weak." The circle erupted into chaos, shouts bouncing off the concrete. Maya turned, walking back toward Tanya, each step heavy with the knowledge that nothing in her life would be the same after this. She had faced the yard's ruler and endured, and in prison, that meant one thing: her name had just carved its place into the hierarchy, whether she wanted it or not. The yard fight with Red didn't end when the circle broke apart. It followed Maya everywhere she went. The silence that had settled over the prison during those last moments clung to her like a second skin, reshaping the way eyes lingered on her in the chow line, in the showers, in the long march back to the cell block. She wasn't just another new face anymore. She was something else, an anomaly. That night, the block buzzed. Whispers darted through the tears like sparks, each version of the story more exaggerated than the last. Some said Maya had knocked Red unconscious with a single blow. Others claimed the guards had let her win to stir up trouble. What mattered wasn't truth, but perception. And the perception was this: Maya Torres had stood toe-to-toe with the most feared inmate in the yard, and hadn't broken dot in her cell. Tanya watched Maya sit down on the bunk, still breathing heavily from the day. "You know what you've done, right?" she asked, voice a mix of awe and warning. Maya leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Her shoulder throbbed from the fence. Slam! And her knuckles were raw, but the adrenaline still hummed under her skin. "I didn't want any of this." Tanya laughed softly, shaking her head. "Doesn't matter what you want. You humiliated Red in front of everyone. Even with that nod she gave you, don't think it's over. That woman doesn't let go easy." Maya turned her head, meeting Tanya's eyes. "Then why didn't she finish it?" "She could have, because you showed her something she hasn't seen in a long time," Tanya said. "A fight she couldn't crush. Maybe she respects that. Maybe she hates it. Either way, you just became someone people notice, and that's dangerous in here." The danger became clear the next morning. At breakfast, when Maya entered the mess hall, the usual shuffle of trays and metal utensils dimmed. Inmates parted slightly, some nodding in acknowledgement, others sneering with contempt. Respect and hostility came in equal measure, but what she didn't see was indifference. She had become part of the prison's currency. Her name traded in whispers and wages. That she sat with Tanya. Two younger inmates approached hesitantly. One had a bruise blooming across her jaw. The other kept her head lowered. Torres, the braver one, said, her voice low. Red's crew won't touch you now. But they'll come for us if we don't stand somewhere. You got room at your table. Maya studied them carefully. Their request wasn't really about food. It was about protection, about aligning with someone who'd proven herself. She didn't answer right away, letting the silence stretch until they shifted uneasily. Finally, she said, sit if you want. But don't think I can save you from everything. They nodded, sliding into the seats, grateful for even that slim chance. Tanya leaned in close, whispering so only Maya could hear. You see what's happening. You're building a crew, whether you mean to or not. The truth was undeniable. Survival in prison wasn't solitary. Power spread like branches, and once you touched it, others clung to you, hoping for shade. Maya hadn't asked for leadership, but it was forming around her all the same. Later that day, a guard pulled her aside. Warden wants another word. His tone was careful now, lacking the mocking edge from before. When Maya entered Carrick's office, the warden was already smiling. Papers spread out, as if her presence had been anticipated. Congratulations, he said smoothly. You've accomplished what none of my staff could, humbling Red without spilling blood. The balance is shifting, and you, Torres, are in the center of it. Maya didn't reply. She stood, arms crossed, waiting for the real reason he'd called her. Carrick leaned forward. I'll make this simple. Red may nod at you, but don't think she's done. She'll either recruit you or break you. When she comes knocking, you'll need to decide. And when you decide, I want to know where your loyalties fall. Maya held his gaze, unblinking. I don't play your games. The warden chuckled. Then you're already playing, whether you know it or not. When she returned to her cell, the block was quieter, but the tension had deepened. Maya sat on her bunk, flexing her sore knuckles, Tanya's words echoing in her head. She hadn't asked for followers, hadn't asked for power. Yet prison had a way of giving you roles you never chose. She knew one thing with certainty. From this point on, she could no longer move through the yard unnoticed. Every choice she made would ripple outward, binding her tighter to a game she had never wanted to play. Days after the fight in the yard, the prison felt different. The air carried a sharper edge, as though every glance, every shuffle of boots along the corridor was weighed against Maya's presence. Where once she had been a newcomer to be ignored or mocked, now she was a pivot point in the prison's unspoken order. But respect came with eyes too many of them. It began during laundry duty. Maya stood at the long concrete sink, dunking uniforms into grey water that smelled faintly of bleach. Tanya worked beside her, sleeves rolled, humming under her breath, as though pretending they were anywhere else. Across the room, two women from Red Circle watched closely, whispering in low voices. The newcomers who had asked for Maya's protection stood nearby as well, folding shirts too quickly, their nervousness obvious. One of Red's lieutenants finally broke the silence. Spike leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. Her gaze was sharp, the kind of look that dared you to pretend you hadn't noticed. Torres, she called, voice dripping with mock casualness. You're making friends fast. Word is, you're building something. Maya didn't look up immediately. She rinsed the last uniform, wrung it out, and only then met Spike's stare. I'm not building anything, she said evenly. I'm just surviving. Spike smirked, stepping closer until her shadow stretched over the sink. That's funny, 'cause surviving don't usually mean collecting strays. Her eyes flicked toward the two nervous women clinging to Maya's side. Red's letting you breathe for now, but her patience has limits. The room held its breath. Tanya straightened, ready to step in if fists flew, but Maya shook her head slightly, signaling her to hold. She faced Spike fully now, her voice calm. If Red has something to say, she can say it herself. I don't answer to messengers. A dangerous flicker passed across Spike's face, but she didn't move. Instead, she laughed coldly and walked out, her boots echoing against the concrete. The tension broke, but not in relief, more like a reminder of a storm circling just out of sight. That night, Tanya spoke plainly. She's testing you. They all are. You're not just in Red's crosshairs anymore. You've got women looking at you like you're their way out of hell. That means you'll be tested from both sides, by those who want to tear you down, and those who want to lean on you. Maya sat on the bunk, silent for a long time. She hadn't asked for any of this, yet the weight was settling on her shoulders anyway. I don't want an alliance, she said finally. I don't want to be anyone's leader. Then don't, Tanya replied. But understand this, when people start believing you are, choice doesn't matter anymore. They'll follow you whether you tell them to or not. And the moment you step back, someone else will step in and crush them. The truth of it, gnawed at Maya in the days that followed. In the chow line, more inmates began gravitating toward her table. In the showers, women nodded to her in subtle acknowledgement. Even the guards seemed to watch her differently, their eyes alert, as though calculating how far her influence might stretch. The true test came 3 nights later. A scuffle broke out in the corridor, 2 women cornering one of the newcomers who had joined Maya at breakfast. Maya heard the muffled cries echoing down the hall, and didn't hesitate. She pushed through the circle that had formed, shoving one attacker back with her shoulder, planting herself between them and the girl. Enough, she snapped, voice carrying. She's with me. The corridor fell into silence. The attackers froze, then stepped back reluctantly, their expressions a mixture of resentment and calculation. Guards appeared moments later, dispersing the crowd with shouts, but the damage had been done. Maya had spoken publicly, aligning herself with someone weaker. Later, in the quiet of the cell, Tanya's words returned. You understand now. That wasn't just survival. That was leadership. And now everyone knows it. Maya lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. She didn't want power, didn't want the eyes or the expectations. But prison had its own laws that ignored personal desire. She had protected someone openly, and by doing so, she had declared an alliance without meaning to. And she knew exactly what that meant sooner or later. Red would come to collect an answer. Was Maya her rival or her ally? The question had already been asked. The test had already begun. The morning after the corridor incident, the atmosphere in the block felt charged, as though every eye carried a silent message. Whispers traveled ahead of Maya wherever she went. She could feel them in the shuffle of boots behind her, in the way conversations dipped the moment she passed by. By noon, she knew the confrontation she had been dreading could no longer be postponed. Red would come. It happened in the yard. The guards had barely opened the gates when Red's crew shifted as one, clearing space in the middle of the cracked concrete. Maya was already there, standing with Tanya and the 2 newcomers she'd shielded, when the ripple passed through the crowd. Red herself was approaching. The prison queen moved like she owned the ground beneath her, tall, broad-shouldered, with braids hanging loose around her face. Red carried the weight of years spent cementing her power. Silence followed her steps. Even the guards by the towers didn't intervene, knowing full well this was theater, ritual, the unspoken order of survival playing itself out. Red stopped only a few feet from Maya. Her eyes, hard and unreadable, swept over the small circle of women who had gathered at Maya's side. Then she locked her gaze on Maya. You're making noise, she said, her voice low, gravel roughened by years of cigarettes and shouting. Noise attracts attention. Attention brings heat. And heat gets people burned. Maya kept her stance calm, her hands loose at her sides. I didn't ask for noise. Red smirked, but there was no humor in it. That's the thing about fire. You don't always ask for it before it spreads. She took a slow step closer, enough for Maya to feel the force of her presence. You stood in front of my people. You claimed that girl in the corridor. That wasn't survival. That was a declaration. The yard had gone silent around them. Dozens of inmates watched, hungry for the outcome. Tanya's body was tense beside her, ready if fists flew. But Maya kept her ground. I claimed nothing. I stopped a beating. That's all. Red tilted, her head, studying her like a puzzle. You think this place runs on fairness? On saving the weak? No. It runs on fear. On knowing who not to touch. And right now, you're telling everyone you're the one who decides. Maya let the silence hang for a beat before answering. Maybe I'm saying no one decides but themselves. A laugh broke from Red, sharp and sudden, startling in its rawness. Idealist, she muttered. Haven't seen one of those in a long time. They don't last here. Her eyes narrowed. But you, maybe you've got teeth. Maybe you don't. I'll give you one chance to choose where you stand. With me, or against me. No middle ground. The weight of the moment pressed heavy. Maya could feel the eyes boring into her, every inmate silently measuring her answer. Aligning with Red meant safety, resources, and power, but also corruption, entanglement, and complicity. Refusing meant painting a target on her back that might never disappear. Maya's heartbeat thudded in her ears. She thought of the girl, in the corridor, trembling under the fists until Maya had stepped in. She thought of Tanya, who had warned her but never abandoned her. She thought of herself, shackled on the bus ride into this place, vowing silently that prison would not consume her. She lifted her chin. I don't need an alliance. I'm not with you. I'm not against you. I'm just surviving my time. Gasps rippled through the yard. It wasn't the answer anyone expected. It wasn't submission, but it wasn't outright defiance either. It was something else, a refusal to play by rules written long before she arrived. Red stared at her for a long, measured moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. Not kindly, not warmly, but with a kind of grudging recognition. You're bold. Bold gets you killed fast. Or it keeps you breathing longer than anyone thought you could. We'll see which way you go. She turned sharply, walking back toward her crew. The yard exhaled as one. Noise swelling again. The spell broken. But everyone knew what had just happened. Maya had been mocked, not crushed, not claimed, but set apart. Back in the cell block that night, Tanya broke the silence. You realize what you did? You told Red no without ever saying the word. That's rarer than you think. Maya lay back on her bunk, staring into the dark. Then maybe that's enough. But deep down, she knew Red's warning wasn't idle. The prison had shifted again, and Maya had drawn a line no one else dared draw. The question wasn't whether Red would test her again. The question was how soon. The next test came faster than Maya expected. 2 days after her standoff with Red, the prison yard boiled over. It started as routine sunlight pressing down on cracked concrete, guards stationed along the towers, inmates moving in clumps across the open ground. Maya had settled into her usual rhythm, walking with Tanya, keeping her eyes sharp, staying close to the edges where attention was less suffocating. But the shift in the air was impossible to miss. Conversations cut short, glances darted in her direction, and groups that usually kept their distance suddenly seemed too close. The first shove came near the pull-up bars. A woman from Red's circle, broad-shouldered, tattoos inked along her forearms, slammed into one of the newcomers Maya had been protecting. The girl stumbled, nearly fell. Laughter erupted around them, loud and biting. The woman didn't move. Away, she shoved again, harder this time. Maya's body reacted before her mind had time to weigh consequences. She stepped forward, planting herself between attacker and victim. Enough, she said, voice cutting through the noise. The yard stilled. This was at the moment everyone had been waiting for. The confrontation that would decide whether Maya was just bold words or something more. The tattooed woman sneered. You think you're untouchable now? You think Red's smile makes you safe? I don't think I'm safe, Maya answered, evenly. But I won't watch you tear someone apart just to prove you can. The woman's fist flew, fast and heavy. Maya barely dodged, the strike grazing her cheek. Gasps followed, a wave of voices rolling across the yard. A guard shouted from the tower, but didn't move. They were watching too, waiting to see how it played out. Maya countered, quick and controlled. Her fist connected with the woman's ribs, forcing a grunt. But the hit wasn't enough to end it. The woman charged again, swinging wildly. Maya ducked, sidestepped, and landed another punch, this time to the jaw. Blood spotted the concrete dot. Now the yard had erupted. Inmates crowded in, forming a circle around them, shouting, jeering, chanting. Tanya tried to push closer, but the crush of bodies held her back. For Maya, the world narrowed to the fight, the smell of sweat and concrete dust. The roar of voices blending into a single vibrating hum. The tattooed woman lunged, grabbing Maya's shirt, trying to drag her down. Maya's knees hit the ground, the impact rattling up her spine. For a second, it seemed she might be pinned. But she twisted, driving her elbow into the woman's side, breaking free. The two of them scrambled to their feet, faces inches apart. Breathing hard. Walk away, Maya said, voice low but steady. The woman spat blood on the ground. You're finished. She swung again. This time, Maya didn't just block. She struck back with everything she had. A sharp, clean punch snapped the woman's head sideways. She collapsed to the concrete, groaning, unable to rise. Silence fell over the yard. Dozens of eyes locked on Maya. The circle held, but no one stepped forward. Guards shouted now, charging down from the towers, breaking through the crowd with batons raised. The fight was over, But the result was undeniable. Maya stood tall, chest heaving, blood smeared along her cheek but unbroken. The woman at her feet was one of Red's trusted soldiers and she had fallen. The guards grabbed Maya roughly, dragging her toward the gate. Tanya shouted after her, but Maya didn't resist. As they hauled her away, she caught a final glimpse of the yard. The inmates weren't mocking now. They weren't laughing. They were watching her with something else, something closer to awe or fear. Hours later, in solitary, the adrenaline finally faded, leaving Maya in silence. The cement walls pressed in, the air stale and unyielding. She sat on the narrow bunk, head tilted back, replaying every moment. She hadn't sought this. She hadn't wanted to rise. But prison had decided for her. The yard had erupted, and she had stood her ground. Maya closed her eyes, hearing the echo of Red's voice in her head. We'll see which way you go. Now the whole prison had seen. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She had crossed into something else entirely and would be no turning back.